All right, in this episode, we talk about the core
and internal impingement issues.
Stephen Godani here at the @Top Velocity # Pitch and Shift show, where you go to Snapchat. That's all the places that you go to is Snapchat, because we're not doing any other social networks. No, I'm just kidding. No, we're really kind of pushing for Snapchat. We like how easy it is to interact with you guys. So I know it's hard to ask questions there, but start using Snapchat, right?
It's not hard to ask questions there at all.
I'm not a big fan of it, but they keep pushing it.
They're using it in the White House, David.
Oh, so
come back to that.
Start using Snapchat with us. We've been pushing a lot there. Check us out. But still, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can go and @Top Velocity # Pitch and Tips. Ask your question, we answer it on the show. And thanks for everybody's support at the ABCA convention. We had a really great experience. If you didn't watch our video talking about it, I know we had some disappointing things that we learned about it, but still, all in all, it was a really great experience. And learned a lot. It was cool to see a lot of the things in the industry that are being pushed. If you have any questions on that, we'd love to talk about it. There's a lot of new things that are coming out in baseball, and I think there's a lot of promising things technologically that we're going to see in baseball in the future, which is pretty cool. And good, let's keep the show going. What's your question for today? Callie Boyd Johnson asks, how important is core? I'm 5'8", topping at 90-92, pretty good leg strength, okay upper body strength. Yeah, core, it's a good question. Good core is very important, obviously. You know, hip shoulder separation, trunk rotation, all that obviously is going to be very core dominant, very dependent on the power that you can generate in your core. Holding loads in the core takes a lot of strength. You know, and for you to have a good core, you're going to have a lot of core strength. But how do we develop core strength is really the better question. And a lot of guys, you know, immediately want to think we've got to do some type of sit-ups or crunches or whatever, just pillars, core work. Yeah, that can help, but ideally we're going to develop really, really elite athletic core strength Olympically. So there's no better core exercise than like a front squats, because holding that bar, your core has to stabilize your spine, or your spine would just crumble. So more weight we put in that position, especially moving up and down in a squat position, the more our core is really involved in doing what it does best, which is stabilizing the spine, stabilizing the core. And we're gonna, sorry, we got two beasts in here today. We're really gonna get a lot of core development from a front squat, and you know, catching a clean, even pulling a clean, you know, all that is really cleaning, you know, snatching, even though we don't advance the snatch till later on in our training, are very core dominant. So I say the best way to hit a core is really through the Olympic lifts. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just was talking like to Matt Bruce about core development, and he was pretty much just saying like anything that's stabilizing the core while your legs are doing something else. That's why like squat is huge for core development. Like it's not so much like having that jack six pack. It's more just about being able to stabilize it and not let it move while we're doing something like a squat, not letting it collapse over in a front squat or collapse. So like you see that in a lot of guys' squats, how they'll have a weak core, everything will start collapsing, it'll kind of break the form. And then when you transfer it over to pitching, just holding hip to shoulder separation, getting everything loaded back and keeping everything loaded back while the legs do their thing, the core plays a huge part in that.
Yeah, I find guys who have weak cores have a really hard time in hip shoulder separation, a really hard time counter rotating into the hip rotation, you know, really loading that trunk rotationally, in flexion extension when they have really weak cores. So it is very critical. But the best way to do it is really Olympic lifting. So
yeah, Matt showed me an awesome core exercise for that. Will really beat you up, but I'll keep it secret until you guys come down to a camp.
Ooh, all right, that was cool. Nice little bonus there. All right, next question. Jacob Meyer asks, replace my question if you can to what biomechanical flaws could cause internal impingement? Good question, Jake. You know, any impingement issues are really a restriction in the function of the shoulder capsule. So typically, if you're genetically born with a smaller shoulder capsule, which I had very small shoulder capsules, you're more prone to impingement. So I think right off the bat, it's a lot of it has to do with your own architecture, and that's really sometimes the issue. And so if what's an internal impingement? It's more on the posterior side. It typically occurs when you're in full external rotation and abduction. And so I find it, yes, it can be, they say, from weak interior muscles, so meaning like your arm, especially in the throw, is being slammed back into that posterior position, and it could irritate and have more effect on irritating the cuff and that impingement, and that internal impingement. Or it could be, I would say probably that's the biggest reason for it. Like I said, I'm not a medical doctor. I know impingements are really hard on the rotator cuff. Basically, you're not working with a lot of room between the ball and socket, and it's fraying the muscles, it's irritating the muscles, causing inflammation, and breaking down the joint. So biomechanical flaws that are going to link to that are, if I'm in too hyper of abduction, I'm going to be more prone to impingement. It's going to be not internal impingement though. That'll be more pretty much the clavicle into the supraspinatus on the top of the shoulder in those issues. External rotation, anything being horizontally abducted, being pulled back, we can create more of an impingement there. So you're going to have to watch the arm path. You're going to have to make sure that you don't hyperabduct, you don't excessively horizontally abduct. Even though all these things can support ball speed, you're going to have to be very careful if you're a guy who has a very small shoulder capsule to protect in those biomechanical flaws or biomechanical components that could cause more irritation in those impingements. So at the same time too, one of the guys I talked to recently talked to a guy who has an impingement issue. Be very careful on how you load that joint. Like, overloading it with heavy throws, weighted throws. I think you got to be careful because you're putting more stress and you're putting it in more challenging positions because of the weight. It would pull your arm back more maybe because of the weight, which could do that. It could lay your arm back more because of the weight. So be very careful in throwing with heavier instruments if you are prone to impingement. Be very careful in your weight training when building upper body strength. You're going to have to build very slow or build it up very slow and be focused very on the technique of everything to really be careful of overdoing it or causing inflammation. So typically someone with a small shoulder capsule more prone to impingement, you're going to inflame a lot easier. And that's why I was a guy who felt like I had to be in ice all the time. Even though I know we can go into debates on ice, but I felt like I always needed it even for a short period of time because I was always inflamed. My joint was always inflamed. And that's internal impingement. What's a biomechanical flaw that links internal impingement? So impingement is a really tough subject because it's like you're trying to be very careful. At the same time too, you're trying to max out your ability to perform at a high level of speed. So you're walking a fine line. So it's hard to say, just don't do this and you'll be fine. You just need to understand what's causing the problem. And like I said, it's usually linked to hyperabduction, horizontally, and just in regular shoulder abduction. And you need to be very careful in your training environments not to cause more irritation in those impingements. I don't know. Anything you want to add to that?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that something that just scapular function can have a big part against too?
Yeah, right. If the scaps aren't functioning, that's a good point, then the humerus is being jammed more into the ball and socket, causing more of an impingement. So scapular function really support it.
And it just goes along with kind of just how a lot of pitchers have weak shoulders and stuff too. And it could go even along with getting hip to shoulder separation with the core and everything with your scap.
To give the arm time to go through a better arm path.
So if you don't have those things and you're just kind of going through it, then you can run into an impingement, which would be an issue. And that is, like you're saying, something that you don't want to be adding more weight to it and trying to bust through.
Yeah, so I think Steve just made a great point. I mean, really work to have a very functional scap. Mm-hmm. One that, when it goes up into abduction, it upwardly rotates and retracts. To give it the acromion or the acromial space more room. When you go into internal rotation, it protracts. So there's function there, moving with the movements of the arm. creating more space, preventing more impingement. You're right. So scapular function is huge. I was a guy, I knew when I was having those impingement issues, which led to my rotator cuff tear, that I had very poor scapular strength, and that more than likely was my problem. So I had a small shoulder capsule, and then I had poor scapular strength, and that's really the perfect recipe with bad mechanics, the perfect recipe for injury, in the rotator cuff.
Cleaning up that scapular function and just like the huge debate on pitchers shouldn't lift overhead probably has a big thing to do with it too. Not building just overall strength in the shoulders and just upper body.
Yeah, how are you going to build the scapular strength? You're going to have to do it in some overhead pressing. You're going to have to do it obviously in some,
band work
and stuff like that. But it's really going to be hard to develop a really strong shoulder capsule without any overhead pressing at all. But the problem is if you're telling a guy because you got impingements and you have a weak shoulder, don't overhead press. But at the same time, so you're going to tell him to go out and try to throw 85, 90 miles an hour. Doesn't make any sense to me. So you're just going to have to be in your training environment just as technically aware of what's going on. And you're going to have to slowly build that strength up and try to not have weak shoulders anymore. And I think that's the problem is we can't handicap guys who have small shoulder capsules, have poor scapular function, who have weak shoulders. We can't allow that to happen if you want to be a high velocity pitcher because you're just setting yourself up for injury. All right, so it's a good question. I think it's a tough subject too, and I think it would be great if we had a medical doctor here to talk more about it. But I actually went through it. I tore my rotator cuff due to an impingement, and everything I've just discussed about is really the issues around it. So hopefully that'll give you something in your programming. And in our training programs, the 3x pitch velocity programs, they're really built to help guys with these issues. At the same time, too, you got to make sure you understand as you're going through the program what to avoid and how to technically do things correctly. And that's why we recommend guys come to camps. And because when guys come to camps and they say, look, I'm more prone to impingement, I will take you to the side and spend the extra time with you to show you through the program what you need to be aware of and how you need to do things specifically for your issue. All right, so we got 3x Velocity Camps coming up this weekend. Check out topvelocity.net. Great questions. Keep them coming. See you on Snapchat.
Yeah, hit us up on Snapchat.
Steven will see you on Snapchat. Check out the next episode.